Thank you for listening to Lone Star Community Radio. This program was broadcasted and recorded live from the LSCR studios in downtown Conroe, Texas. Lone Star Community Radio is supported by listeners like you. Donate and sponsor today. For more information on getting involved with Lone Star Community Radio, contact us at lscrstudios@gmail.com or visit us online at www.irlonestar.com.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us this morning on the weekly business hour. This edition, I think we've got a wonderful show lined up for you, and hopefully we'll provide you with information, ideas that you literally could use in your business today. My name's Rick Schissler. I'm the host of the show. I'm also a Silver Fox advisor, as well as the founder of OneBestConsult.com. We're broadcasting to you today from the studios of Lone Star Community Radio. Lone Star Community Radio is the community radio serving Montgomery County, Texas. It's located in downtown Houston on the first floor of City Hall. What does Lone Star do for the community? Well, it's a nonprofit, and primarily it serves the community, providing a platform for anyone in the community to come in, put together a show, and do a show like you're listening to today. This is my 14th year with the Weekly Business Hour, and I've enjoyed each and every one of them. Our goal is to talk to local entrepreneurs, business owners, learn about their journey, the things they did right, and the things they would admit they did wrong, and hopefully passing on that information to our listeners so that they can follow a better road to success in their business. And we're also blessed to have a number of what I call experts, as we do today, join us from time to time, located around the United States, and provide their expertise to us, an opportunity for you, the listener, to learn from them and potentially connect with them if you want to further pursue that area with them. I encourage you, when you have a chance, go to the website for the station. It's irlonestar.com. That's irlonestar.com. Learn a little bit about the station. Potentially, if you live in the area, you can volunteer. You can put a program together, have your own show, or at least a donation. A donation of any size is appreciated because this is nonprofit community radio. An idea for today. I was thinking about this segment over the weekend, and one of the things that came to mind was a discussion I had last week with a roundtable of business owners, small business owners, and we talked about, one of the issues we talked about was about having a business lawyer. Not just a lawyer, but a business lawyer, which would be defined as someone who's an attorney, who practices law, but they also understand business. So often you find professionals, whether it's doctors, accountants, architects, the list goes on, and they understand their particular field, but they don't have an understanding of the people they're serving. So a business lawyer will understand business, and that's invaluable, obviously. I encourage you, if you don't have a business lawyer to communicate with, not only when you need something like a contract, a lease agreement, or you've entered into a dispute with a client, customer, vendor, but somebody once, twice a year, maybe you take to lunch and you talk about your business, you talk about your industry, develop ideas from the perspective of your legal advisor. So your business lawyer becomes a business advisor. I encourage people every day when I talk about this subject to do the same with your accountant, insurance agent. Look for people who are willing to take the time to understand your business. That means not only will their advice, or should I say it should be more on point and more beneficial, but it also might help you avoid some traps, potential roadblocks, and help you build that successful business that you're trying to build. So consider it. Have a business lawyer or a business advisor who actually happens to practice law. A reminder to you, this show broadcast on YouTube, so you can watch as well as listen to us in the discussion. Just go to the Weekly Business Hour page and scroll down, and you click on today's show, and you can watch again as well as listen. Also, I like to remind people, and I will do so most likely several times during the show, to send me an email if you have a comment about the show, our format, our guest, Or if you just have a question about your business, you've got a challenge, you're trying to decide what to do, send me that challenge. I love to respond to people. This is what I do for a living. I'm a business advisor. As a Silver Fox, the founder of OneBestConsult.com, I've spent the last 20 plus years working with small businesses, helping them build a better, stronger, and more successful business. So drop me an email, rick@irlonestar.com. That's Rick, R-I-C-K, at irlonestar.com. Okay, we've gotten through the preliminaries. So now we're going to go to our guest, Chuck. Chuck, you're a regular contributor of the show, and I deeply appreciate it. It's funny, last week I happened to listen to a segment of an earlier show, and as I was prepping, and I thought about, boy, you bring to the table a lot of advice that's really dead on, that is really could be helpful if people will listen, could be helpful to people to improve their business. And I want to thank you on behalf of the Weekly Business Hour, Lone Star Community Radio, and our listeners for bringing your expertise to the table.
Well, I mean, Rick, I appreciate that. I think that's very kind. But I think a key element of leadership is giving back. And when you've had, I hate to say the opportunities, but it is in some ways, to go ahead and gain a few bruises, a couple of scars from the road that you've traveled, I think it's important to go ahead and pass down some of those learnings, some of those insights as to how to miss a couple of those potholes, because not everybody has to hit every pothole.
Well, and that's the thing. If we read and spend some time learning from business advisors like yourself and maybe even our business lawyer, we can absolutely chart a better path that'll get us where we need to go with fewer bruises, and also typically quicker. We can reach those goals.
Absolutely.
Well, let's start off today's discussion. One of the things that you and I touched on last week was meetings. The bane of existence of anyone who has a business and has one or more employees. You're going to have some kind of meeting. They may be in passing in the hall, and the bigger you get, it seems like the more meetings you have to have, or you seem to have. And there's sort of a trend that I've noticed in my business reading of companies really working hard, larger companies particularly, to limit the number of meetings, to keep the meetings focused, because they found out, and that used to be a joke, Chuck, if I remember correctly, 5, 10, 20 years ago, oh yeah, he just attends meetings. That's what you do for a job. That's a job description. Comment on that. What is the purpose of all these meetings?
Well, I think if you're just having a meeting to exchange information, I think there's a lot better ways out there. Technology has given us, whether it's a messaging app or it's email or anything else, but to just exchange information, staff updates, performance updates, plenty of other ways that don't go ahead take up nearly the amount of time. But I really believe that the purpose of a meeting is to improve organizational judgment. They're great for aligning priorities, making decisions, resolving obstacles, or even coordinating across functions and ultimately gaining clarity and accountability. But they're not just, if you bring your staff together and say, okay, Fred, give me an update as to what you've been doing, and Sally, I want an update from you. You're wasting their time, you're wasting your time, and ultimately, they're generally going to go ahead and devolve into something that I would go ahead and call a complaint session. You're going to get a whole bunch of complaints. Maybe people will feel good at the end of that session, but you'll come back, whether it's next week, next month, next quarter, and you'll have the exact same complaints because you didn't resolve anything. So that's why, to me, if you're going to spend the time and the expense of having a meeting, they really need to be focused on some of those elements that I had talked about just a moment ago.
You obviously make the point, like anything that we do day to day in our job, we have to have a goal, a result that we want to get to. And I have personally, early in my career, been in meetings that the example you gave, they just seem to wander and they become a complaint session, or we start talking about what we're going to do this weekend. And 30 minutes later, we look up and say, okay, what did we accomplish? What am I walking away with that I can utilize to do my job better or achieve the company goals, whatever the situation is? And I think that's why there's somewhat of a pushback right now by companies in general of various sizes against having meetings in general.
Well, I mean, I think unfortunately we've had to go to these um, fun ways, these kind of different things like no meeting Mondays. I mean, do we really need to go ahead and come up with a gimmick like that? Or can we just look at our organizational systems and say, okay, we've got a problem that we have way too many meetings, and let's fundamentally change it by describing what we have meetings for. And only if we're going to have a meeting to go ahead and achieve one of those goals, do we go ahead and have a meeting. So, I mean, and businesses are successful doing kind of the gimmick approach. I mean, it's kind of cool. Everybody has a little fun. But I mean, can you imagine on year 3 of no meeting Mondays? Why didn't we just change the operating system? Why didn't we just go ahead and say, okay, look, meetings are only about aligning priorities or making decisions or resolving obstacles, and put that into our philosophy, put that into our how we go ahead and operate as an organization. Because once you've done that, you can get past the gimmick. You can say, okay, we can have a meeting on Monday because it's purposeful, it's intentional, it's thought out, rather than, well, we had to have this gimmick to get rid of meetings so we could have a day without meetings so we could go ahead. So you're starting to go ahead and solve symptoms rather than the underlying problems.
You know, you make a wonderful point. I was thinking back in my career, and when this sort of movement started against, trying to make meetings more efficient or the day more efficient, and you would be given an agenda, and at the top, if you wanted to have a meeting, you had to fill out what's the purpose, what's the goal of the meeting. And at the end, you were required to say, we achieved this or we did this, a simple statement just to try to teach people that, that this, you got to have a purpose. I mean, you go through your business day, whatever your job is, the more you can stay focused on your job, just common sense, right? You're going to be more successful, assuming that what you're working with, your tools and direction, et cetera, are on point. One of the things when you apply what I call the pendulum test, the pendulum always swinging back and forth. And unfortunately, I got caught on one side, the upside, where after all of this experience and training, I got where, okay, a meeting has to have a purpose. It has to have a goal. And so when I conduct meetings today, whether it's a neighborhood meeting or a ranch, I want to keep things moving. That was one of my things. And sometimes I'm a little abrupt. So you can go too far, but it's now part of my DNA. I don't want to waste people's time. I look around the room and I say, well, this is costing, Bill's here and he's worth $100 an hour and Sally's worth $125. And I say, God, we're spending $1,000, $2,000, if nothing more, with these people's time. And we better damn well accomplish something, and we need to do it effectively and efficiency.
Well, I actually knew an organization that used to scan into a conference room to have a meeting, and they actually had an LED board that would go ahead and, as time went on, it would go ahead and increase and show you the cost of what that meeting was based on the people who had gone ahead and signed into the room. Now, I mean, I hate to go ahead to have to take it to that level, but I also think a great shortcut, but understanding the value and of what that time is worth, I think is insightful. But also at the end of the meeting, if you're saying, well, let's meet again next week, or let's meet again on this topic, next week, next month, that quarter, you're already signaling that you have a problem and you didn't achieve whatever the objective was. Now, did I go, because I sent out in a lot of my meeting requests, I tell them what the objective is. We're going to go ahead and decide on this. We're going to resolve this. We're going to overcome this obstacle. Now, were there times where we couldn't get it done in the amount of time that we had allocated? Absolutely. But for the most part, by putting that objective in there, we probably hit it 95% of the time simply by being very, very clear. The other thing it does, because we know that once meetings get out there and you put it on your calendar, whether it's Outlook or you're using something else, everybody likes to forward a meeting to somebody else to try and get everybody and their brother there. So we don't want to make a decision without it being considered by everybody. But by putting what that objective was in the meeting request, people could see and say, well, that has nothing to do with me. I'd love to hear about the outcome afterwards, but I'm not going to contribute anything. So I don't need to be sitting in that meeting while that decision is made. So it also allowed us to help to figure out that we didn't need as many people. And a lot of people would just self-select and say, I'm not needed in this, so I'm going to decline the meeting. But a lot of times when somebody would set a meeting, it might be a VP or a director or somebody. Well, when they send out a meeting without a clear objective, you kind of have to go ahead and attend, depending on your role and your position, because they may be your boss or they may be a functional lead in a different functional area, and you're thinking, well, out of respect, I'm going to show up. But really what you're doing is just making that meeting far more difficult for them to lead, as well as having a lot more people there and just wasting a lot more time and money.
I'm sitting here thinking about this, and like I said, I rode the pendulum too far in one direction of really pounding on these meetings and why we're having them and so on and so forth. But, as an entrepreneur and small business owner, typically part of their personality of someone who's successful is they have this desire to push on, keep things moving. And I think having a purposeful, successful meeting is hard because of their nature of wanting to keep things moving. In other words, there's a problem, let's solve it now. We can meet at the back of the plant, discuss it, and then go implement it. We don't need a conference room, right? And so you have this kind of a tug of war, because I believe there are certain times you need to meet. You need face-to-face versus Zoom. I happen to believe that because now that's a new challenge. How effective can Zoom meetings be? And I think there's a lot written on that now, and people continue to do it. But as an entrepreneur, it's got to be part of my nature to keep things moving. How do I overcome that? I mean, there's a place for good, quality, purposeful meetings. Entrepreneur, it just doesn't fit in my thinking. What do you say to that?
I mean, I think you're right. I think there is a place for meetings, and you're absolutely correct. I love face-to-face where I'm having the conversation with the person or the individuals, because I can go ahead and read the body language far better than I can on a Zoom meeting. I mean, one-on-one on a Zoom meeting, I generally have a nice big picture of what they look like and what they're doing. So I get it's better than an audio meeting. But when you start adding 3, 4, 5, and all of a sudden those little pictures become much smaller, and you're kind of like, what? I can't go ahead and see what their body language is. It gets to be more difficult. So I think you're right. There are reasons to have meetings. But it's not just, hey, let's get everybody together and do a status update. Hey, we have to make a decision, and this is going to be a tough decision. There's going to be pros and cons we're going to have to weigh. We are going to go ahead and look at alternatives, and we know that some things are going to win, some things are going to lose. We're going to have to prioritize, which means deprioritizing or deselecting other things. That certainly warrants a meeting. Coordinating across functions, because, sales is focused on sales, and operations is focused on operations, and logistics is just trying to get everything out the door. Well, but if they're not working together, and the best way to really coordinate across those is to go ahead and come together and have that conversation, resolving obstacles, because again, it may be that I'm unintentionally creating an obstacle. So I'd rather have that face-to-face meeting rather than somebody just bulldoze over me, because maybe there's also some reasons that there is that obstacle to slow us down, to make sure that we're not just racing from point A to point C without going through point B. So, there's a lot of story behind sometimes that we don't get unless we do have the meeting, but we just need to be very, very focused when we choose to have them and say they're not about just doing status updates. They're not about, I understand my organization, every year when we had done the updates for healthcare benefits, we did have a big town hall style meeting. We brought everybody in. Yeah, you could say, well, Chuck, that was an informational meeting. You didn't need everybody there. And you're right. But on the other hand, because they were going to have questions. Now, if you're going to have a town hall meeting like that, give them as much of the information as you can ahead of time. Let them review it, because ultimately what you're really trying to achieve from the meeting is not the passing out of the information, but is the answering of their questions that they've got, because they've had a chance to read it, they've had a chance to digest it, and they don't fully understand it. Now, all of a sudden, rather than just putting information out, which, hey, you can ultimately do with a bulletin board, you're answering those questions and allowing them to move forward. You're helping them to make decisions. Now, granted, these are personal decisions on the healthcare one as to whether to go ahead and buy plan A or plan B. But ultimately, you're coming back to the meetings about making decisions. They're not the organization's decisions. They're not your decisions. But you also don't want your whole operational staff to say, hey, I need to call a one-on-one meeting, because you could be here until the cows come home. So that's where you're right, a big town hall. While on the one hand, it may look like an informational meeting, it really is a decision-making meeting, except the decision isn't in your hands. It's in somebody else's.
It's funny you mentioned the town hall, or the idea of bringing the workforce together, or parts of the workforce. I look at that more as not a meeting, but an event, because it's an opportunity, as any meeting should be, is an opportunity indirectly to strengthen your culture, to strengthen your teams, because as you well know in your career working for mid-sized, larger corporations, sometimes you don't know who Fred really is, or but you exchange emails, you do a Zoom technical call from time to time, whatever. And the idea, not that we get to become best friends or know what kind of car we drive, but the idea that I'm able to observe someone and see how they respond, and I begin to bond indirectly, which again, I believe strengthens your team, it strengthens your culture if you design the conversation and as you lead a meeting for that purpose. Now, that's not the reason to call the meeting, but that's the advantage to me, or one of the indirect advantage of having a meeting face to face. I find it very difficult to achieve those goals if I'm in a Zoom meeting, because it's impersonal. You've always got somebody that's not 100% vested. They're over here working. I've been guilty of that before. I was just listening to the conversation. And so, like I say, the technology, the Zoom and whatnot, have introduced some new challenges, but they're a tool, right, that we need to use selectively if we want to be an effective leader and utilize meetings to help, move the ball forward.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I was in my organization, before Zoom, before conference call, video conference calling, we would have conference calls, and you're right, they're just audio, and things would drift. Maybe you got the email that had the agenda, or that had the slides, or that had, the graphics of what you're going to go over. Maybe you did, maybe you had it there with you, maybe you didn't. So I think Zoom is a far better tool than just doing an audio with 12 other sites on there, not necessarily knowing who's on at any particular site. So I think Zoom is a phenomenal improvement. But is Zoom the answer to everything? No. But it can be the answer to a lot of things. I mean, I do a lot of coaching, a lot of advising through Zoom. Why? Because it's expensive to travel. And, if you just want to have that 1-2 hour meeting, it's expensive to go ahead and travel across the country. just for that tight of a focus. So Zoom is a perfect alternative, or a much better alternative. On the other hand, sometimes it's good to go ahead and say, well, there's some other things we can get done, and the travel so we can be face to face is worth it. So let's spend the extra expense and come in and let's meet face to face. And we'll do that 1 hour meeting. Plus we'll do a number of other things which can really only be done face to face. I mean, you can't really walk somebody's production floor on a Zoom call or a FaceTime call with somebody trying to hold their phone and show you different things. You get a few images here and there, absolutely, but you don't nearly get the value that you do in having that walk in talking and pointing things out, because they may be looking at one thing, trying to show you that, but something else catches your eye that may go ahead and be another symptom, or it could be a root cause for what they're trying to go ahead and talk about.
You mentioned something in your response there, conference calls. I totally forgotten about conference calls. And it's funny because, as a tool, I don't think about it. I serve as a volunteer on a community board, and two of the older, guys who had very successful careers, whenever we want to talk about something where a meeting in person is not justified, we'll have a conference call. They never say Zoom meeting. It's always a conference call. And I kind of said, oh, yeah, we used to do that, which is fine. But there's still tools out there that perhaps are even underutilized. But I agree with you, the Zoom tool is important. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about another subject that I think is super, super important to our small business, big business, medium business. And that's the task of hiring of people. And I'm not necessarily talking about the ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, but the whole concept that a company has on hiring, replacing and creating new positions. So please stay with us. We'll be right back with you.
Every Friday, tune into Texas Ticket on Conroe's 104.5 and 106.1 FM with Armando Nino of Gold Lake Conroe, focusing on Montgomery County area events and places. Get a feel of the Texas spirit at the event, paired with guest and vendor interviews, event coverage, and ticket giveaways, and so much more. Join us Fridays and punch your Texas ticket. For more information on the show, visit irlonestar.com/Texas Ticket.
But the disruption that it had to the rest of their team, it started bringing down the overall performance of the organization. One person. So, that's how, to me, important a single hire is and can be.
You make a lot of good points there. One of the things that I find in small business is, we don't hire people. We may have 10 employees or 20 employees, and we're not in a hiring mode except 2, 3, 4 times a year. And therefore, no one's really assigned that responsibility. Like, I grew up in a family business. We had a hiring office because we had enough employees, and there were skilled people that worked there, and that was their job, was to be the front line of screening, hiring people, and sending them out to the plants to be further evaluated. One of the things I tell people is you need to sit down and just write out a checklist. I call it a hiring file. I put that checklist so whenever the hiring situation comes up, I can pull the file or go to my computer, bring it up, and I can refresh my memory, because hiring requires, in my opinion, a little bit of art. A lot of science is out there that can help you. And so you've got to get yourself in the mindset, because, again, I personally believe it's an extremely important decision in a company, but we don't pay that much attention to it. Even if we're large enough to have HR departments and all that, I still find a lot of companies, they don't pay much attention or put the emphasis on hiring that I think they should if they want to build long-term successful company. Turnover. People say, if someone turns over, it costs money. They even got it quantified. Texas prison system. If they turn over a prison guard, it costs them roughly $50,000 and change. I mean, they've calculated it out to the change, but it costs them more because when I have turnover, regardless of the reason, retirement, I mean, all of them have a little different effect, but the effect is I create some confusion, whether so it slows the process down. It slows the business down. And again, a lot of people just look over that, particularly entrepreneurs, small business owners, the fact that I've got some turnover. If it's tied to me not doing a good job in hiring, then shame on me.
Well, and I think you make a couple of great points. One, everybody should have a checklist. I don't care if you have an HR department, because you're not outsourcing your hiring to the HR department. Ultimately, it comes to that business leader who has that opening position. They need to go ahead and take ownership. HR may go ahead and facilitate it. So I think everybody needs that file folder, whether electronic or physical, that they can go ahead and pull out, hey, this is how we go ahead and do hiring. The checklist of what are the things to look for. Having a good job description from the previous position, or if it's a new position, creating that job description. What are the things you're looking for? I mean, what are the experience versus the educational? What are you willing to trade off if they don't go ahead and hit that educational mark, but maybe they make up for it in experience? I think that's great to go ahead and have that conversation, even with yourself or with HR, if you have an HR department. But having a process, having a checklist, understanding what the value of that hiring process is. But don't go ahead and just throw it over the wall and say, well, HR's got this, even if you do have an HR department, because ultimately that person's not going to be working in HR, they're going to be working for you. And if they're working for you, you need to take some ownership as to who it is that you've selected to go ahead and fill that role. Because HR, yeah, they may touch base again in 3 months after a probationary period, 6 months, or once a year for an annual performance review. But for the most part, they may or may not care deeply because they don't have the ownership of what needs to get done in that particular department or in that particular role. So I think it's really important that every leader has that hiring practice, that hiring checklist in their drawer that they can go ahead and pull out, because ultimately it comes down to them saying, well, HR, I understand your process, but wait a second, we need an extra interview in there because I want my whole team to interview them once we get down to the very, very few candidates. Or HR may say, well, it only takes, one interview or 2 interviews. Well, nope, I think a third one is important because I still have a doubt and my gut is telling me something. I'm not sure what it is yet, but maybe another interview will go ahead and help. And I think, that's what's really, really important, that we as leaders take ownership of the hiring process, even if we have the expertise of an HR person to help us along.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because again, I think it's a responsibility that gets shortchanged, and it starts with the leadership. A quick side story I experienced the other day: if you're listening, you don't think it's important to pay attention and build a workforce that has longevity and experience. I was interviewing landscapers the other day, and a guy came by and he made his presentation, and part of his pitch, if you will, was, well, the owner and I knew each other back when, and then he went through the credentials that related to landscaping, and then he was quick to say, and our main project leader has been with the company for 24 years. And I mean, this was part, and I think this was well practiced and thought out, and that made me check a box on my list to hire a landscaper, so to speak, that, hey, here's a company been around, and they're keeping their key employees, so the person that comes out here is not somebody they hired off a parking lot or just somebody's brother-in-law or whatever. It's somebody that's been in the business, worked for the company. And this gets back to hiring. They hired somebody, they've stayed with the company, they've learned. And so I'm definitely, not just because of that factor, but it made me say, okay, let's go to the next step, and make it work. So there are all kinds of benefits for leaders in developing a good quality checklist for hiring and paying attention to it, other than just, well, how's Joe doing?
No, Rick, I mean, I absolutely agree. Couldn't agree more. We at Lazy Boy, we used to have people periodically who had 50 years of employment with the company. 50 years. I mean, that is an absolute career. And it was neat, the things that they could say, hey, we've seen change, but you knew that they were invested. You knew that they had bought in. You knew that they understood the culture. I mean, not that a temporary employee or somebody who comes in can't, but you knew that these were the people who really understood the bigger picture. They'd gone through, the highs, they'd gone through the lows. They'd seen a few things, and they were the people you generally wanted to have a conversation with periodically, just to say, what was it like back when, and how can we take some of the lessons from back then and apply them to what we're going through today? And they would have some unbelievable insights.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing when you have a foundational core of people that have been there and done it. And you cited some great examples of how you can utilize that core to strengthen the organization. The newer people, I should say, not necessarily new. 50 years is an amazing track record to have, and it says a lot about the business to me. Well, let's switch gears a little bit as we kind of wind down here in the few minutes we have left. Let's talk about setting metrics in a business. I find so many entrepreneurs, small business people, medium-sized business owners, we have these industry standards. At the very best, they have that. But the metrics for their business to get from A to B, then to C, then to D, as far as their growth, where they're trying to go, it seems to be difficult for a lot of folks to do that.
Well, I mean, I see a couple things. One of the biggest mistakes is some businesses want to measure absolutely everything. And, that creates a certain amount of resources right there to go ahead and capture the data, to analyze the data, to report the data, to review the data, then to go ahead and decide, what do we do with the data? But you're right, there are other businesses where their biggest problem is they don't have any metrics. They just kind of let hope take its course. I don't think we want to be on either end of those extremes, but what we need to go ahead and start with, what are our desired outcomes? What are we trying to achieve? It may be growth. It may be just delivering the absolute best customer experience. Maybe they're one and the same. Maybe they're totally different. Then we want to go ahead and look at and ask the question, what must be true for that to happen? And then finally, what behaviors or processes drive those exact results? Because those are the metrics that we need to go ahead and be capturing, following, and looking at and adjusting with on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. But every metric should every metric should answer three questions. Are we winning? Are we improving? And do we need to act?
Repeat that, because I think that is so important. I mean, that's a jewel right there. Repeat those steps real quick so people have a chance. I encourage you folks, if you're listening, write it down.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately metrics should drive decisions. And in order to go ahead and do that, they need to answer three questions. Are we winning? Are we improving? And do we need to act? Because sometimes the metric says, hey, stay the course. Don't do anything. You don't need to change anything. Sometimes it says you need to take a left turn up ahead, and if you don't do it quickly, you're going off a cliff.
Another part of metrics establishing and having addressing the three criteria you just mentioned is leadership doesn't, in some cases, has them, and I get it because of numbers depending on what you're, but doesn't really share effectively or get buy-in from the people that are part of the group that needs to work together to achieve the metrics. People are hesitant, business owners particularly, seem to be, not everyone obviously, but they're hesitant to get that buy-in and communicate with the people that are actually performing the job, that are making things move forward. Any thoughts about that?
Nobody knows the job better than the operator doing it. So why wouldn't you share? I mean, do you need to go ahead and share your profit margin? Do you need to go ahead and share, what type of reserves you have? Probably not. But you do need to go ahead and share what, the feedback you're getting from customers. Hey, this product is coming out a little off, or the service isn't being delivered quite like what we would expect. Because it's those operators that are providing that service or providing that product or creating that product, they're the best ones to know how to go ahead and get it back on track. So to me, sharing the metric is kind of just the baseline, and then having a conversation with them saying, okay, we've got some problems. Let's be honest about it. Now, I need your help to go ahead and overcome those problems. I'm the manager, I'm the business leader, I'm the owner. But I understand that I don't operate without you, but you don't get a paycheck without me. This is not a threat. This is just, okay, we have different roles. And your role is as vital as mine because you make the things happen. You provide the good or the service, the product that we go ahead and give to our customer, and they pay us.
I carry that conversation. This is me personally and the experiences I have. I carry that conversation even a step further, where as I build the workforce, say for a startup, or I buy an existing business and like one business, we had 100 plus employees. All of a sudden they were our employees the next day after the closing. And the idea that I share with appropriately and timely what my goals as the leader are for the company or the owner. And I don't need to get into the details, but I share with them not only my vision as far as what I'd like the company to become or look like, but also some of the goals. Say, I've given myself 10 years to get the company to here, and share that with these people. Something that's probably they've never heard about in their life and in their career. Someone actually sharing the vision and the goals, particularly the goals that I might have or the owners have with the business. And I find that, at least in my experience, with one or two little exceptions, turned out to be a great way to continually motivate and keep a conversation going, to encourage the employees, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's really important to try to do that.
Well, I mean, Rick, to me, I use the analogy of a road trip a lot when I'm talking with people about business. And ultimately, the founder, the business owner, the leader, they're the ones who are sitting behind the driver's seat. And everybody else in the vehicle, I don't want to say, they're passengers, but they're not just sitting there idle. But they want to go ahead and know, what are our next stops? What are our next milestones? What's our ultimate destination? Nobody jumps into a vehicle and says, well, we're just going wherever the vehicle takes us, or except maybe a few instances. Realistically, yes, they do want to have that conversation. They do want to have that understanding, because they're going to be able to make better decisions. They're going to be able to be better positioned to contribute toward the success of that journey if they have some at least basic understanding of that journey. And what are our goals? What's our goal? Where do we want to get by the end of the day, or by the end of the week, or by the end of the month or the quarter? They want to understand, well, are we heading toward Salt Lake City, or are we heading to Boston? Because you know what? Sometimes we get turned around. There are lots of detours out there on roads today due to construction and other obstacles. But if all of a sudden they say, wait a second, Rick or Chuck, it appears that we're heading to Boston, but I thought you said we want to go to Salt Lake City. And, if you catch it quickly, it costs almost nothing. If you catch it after a day or 2 days or 3 days of driving, the expense is going to be far, far greater. So let them be part of your eyes, your ears. And they're on the journey with you. So why not let them take an active position? I understand they're not necessarily investors. They're not necessarily co-owners, but they still have a role and they want to go ahead and be active participants in that role.
Well, Chuck, we need to wrap up, but I've got to put a footnote on this. You had said something earlier about involving the employees, the workforce, into decision making, and you mentioned at Lazy Boy these 50-year employees and whatnot. The same thing here. When you get people to buy in, and it's not a one-shot effort, it's built. It has to happen over a period of time, but I've gotten more valuable insight into situations or potential issues, problems, challenges from people that were on the floor, so to speak, than me sitting in an office or driving around in a car or even talking to a trusted business advisor. There's a perspective, folks, that's there, and you will be able to make better decisions for you, your family, if you're a business owner, and the business itself and your employees, if you have that perspective to consider when making a decision. And so I think it's critical to develop that workforce in a way that you will get that insight. It's very important. Chuck, a lot to learn today. You've provided, as always, a lot of great information. I encourage you folks, if you missed any part of it, or even if you re-listen to today's program, it'll be posted shortly on YouTube, on our station, on the station webpage at irlonestar.com, the weekly business hour. Chuck Knabusch, I can't thank you enough for joining us and sharing, again, the invaluable information you bring to the table. And folks, please put a note on your calendar. We're going to be back next Monday, as we have for the past 14 years, at 11 a.m. And we'll have some more great conversation with a special guest. And again, until next week, stay engaged and always keep your focus on what counts in your business. Thanks.